Let's say our blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher
Kishanu
v'asuk
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Praise to you, Lord of God, rule of the universe. You've made us toy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. With that, we're going to jump into the Amidah. So last time, to review, we did the beginning of the Amidah.
The haircut.
And we did the Avot paragraph about our ancestors and how God had a different relationship with each of them, which is why we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, as opposed to God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And people, as of late, have added God of Sarah, God of Rebecca, God of Rachel, God of Leah. So that was the Avot paragraph. And then we did the Gevurot paragraph where we talked about God's powers. And we talked about how multiple times it talks about God gives life to the dead. And we talked about different ways of understanding that text, whether it's resurrection at the time of the Messiah, or the trees coming back to life, or people living on after death through the memories of them, as well as the impact of their actions. Then we looked at the Kedushah. And the text that I chose was the Shabbat morning Shacharit Kedushah. There's also a teensy tiny version, same focus of holiness, in the evening when it's a silent Amidah, or when you're praying without a minyan. The question that I posed is one about when have you experienced God, under the theory that the first paragraph, the first blessing, is about God in history, the second blessing is about God in nature, and the third blessing is about our relationship with God directly, our direct experience of God. I have since changed the question to be that according to Leviticus, we should be holy because God is holy. The chapter then goes on to describe ways of interacting with others that would bring more holiness into the world. What are some holy ways that you can interact with others or with the world? However, seeing as how we have 4 more blessings to get through today, I will simply leave that question for you to ponder after this class. And this brings us to the middle blessings of the Amidah. Justin, would you read this and then go on to read the next text as well, please?
No problem. The context?
No, sorry, the middle blessings. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger.
The Amidah now turns to a set of 13 blessings of request. Bakasha on weekdays, or an extended blessing of multiple paragraphs regarding the nature of the day. Kadshut Hayom on Shabbat and holidays. This source sheet is only focused on the 3 blessings at the beginning and the 3 blessings at the end, which are common to all Amidah.
Thank you. So we're going to proceed right on. All right, moving on to the next blessing. Justin, if you would keep going, please.
Siddur Ashkenazi Shabbat Mariv Amidah temple service. Adonai our God, embrace your people Israel and their prayer. Restore worship to your sanctuary. May the prayer of the people Israel be lovingly accepted by you, and may our service always be pleasing. May our eyes behold your compassionate return to Zion. Praised are you, God, who restores your divine presence to Zion. This blessing is about God's accepting our prayers and or service of God. In what ways do you serve God?
Thank you.
I suppose for me in my life, the way I would answer this question is that I try to serve God through doing as many mitzvahs as I can, and just trying to follow the laws of the Torah, and to adhere to those, and through that be a good and ethical person, and to sort of basically uplift others through the Torah's laws and its restrictions, to sort of, I guess, help me participate in the wider process of tikkun olam.
Thank you. Tikkun olam being repairing the world.
Oh yes, sorry, my bad.
That's all right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When the paragraph previous, is it saying that, I always thought of the compassion return to Zion means the forever return, but is it simply, can it also simply be meaning my comprehension of him being there?
Oh. Maybe. So I think the historical sense of this text is asking, I think it's asking for a return of the temple to Jerusalem. So like a third temple, basically. That being said, we do have in the Torah the story of Jacob's ladder, when Jacob sees the angels going up and down, and he like experiences God communicating with him, and he wakes up and he said, God was in this place and I didn't know it. And I think that what you've hit on is a way of reading this text, this prayer, through the lens of that text in the Torah. May our eyes behold your compassionate return to Zion could be read as, your compassionate return to Zion has already happened. May our eyes simply behold it. Analogous to the story of Balaam and the donkey, which is one of my favorite stories from the Torah, and it's really unfortunate it happens over the summer when Hebrew school and day school are out, but the summer camps all get it. So as a refresher, Balaam is hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Israelites. And he says, well, I can go, but I can only say what God says. And 3 times, and so they head out, and 3 times an angel with a sword blocks the donkey and Balaam from progressing down the road. And 3 times the donkey sees the angel and tries to like avoid it, and Balaam doesn't see the angel, and he hits the donkey. And the 3rd time there's no way around the angel, and so the donkey lies down, and Balaam starts whacking the donkey, and the donkey gets to speak and says, what's up with hitting me? Haven't I always been a faithful donkey to you? Hashtag not cool. And Balaam says, well, what's up with you like wandering off the road and scraping my foot and refusing to go anywhere? Hashtag so not cooler. And then God opens Balaam's eyes to see the angel with the sword, and Balaam says, oh, hashtag my bad. And as someone who loves to read Torah with different voices, this is my favorite part of the Torah to read, because I like to chant Torah in the voice of the donkey. So then they go on, and Balaam is unable to curse the Israelites. And at the last try he gets, he says, Matovu Alecha Yaakov, Mishkanotecha Yisrael, which I believe is in the Har Zion sanctuary. But it's how good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. And this is now in our morning service. And it comes from a non-Jewish prophet. But again, it's an example of our eyes beholding what is already there. So
David, does the return of the 3rd temple require animal sacrifice?
Unclear, and depends who you ask. Some would say yes, and some would say no.
David, I would love to have known you as a child. You must have been fascinating.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, for those who would believe that the temple's return when it would be established wouldn't require sacrifices,
Yeah.
from where would they derive, for someone who might hold to that belief, that it wouldn't require sacrifices? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. They might derive that from the idea that in the Garden of Eden, God tells Adam and Eve, I have given you like all the plants to eat. And then after Noah's Ark, God says, I see that people are evil and have to kill. And so go ahead, here, you can have all the plants and all the animals to eat. So it's seen as so killing animals is a concession to mankind's evil nature. However, I can look up other thoughts on the matter because I'm sure there's probably more out there.
Thank you.
Welcome.
It is interesting that most people don't recognize that when you kill a plant, you're also killing life of a sort.
That is true.
If I may just get back to the question of in what way do you serve God? Right now, or really for the past 7 years, the major way that I serve God is by doing teach-when-along work in climate change issues. And which is why I really appreciate your material that I received in the email. For me, protecting and preserving and sustaining God's creation on earth is one of the most important things I can do.
I'm curious, what specifically do you do?
Well, I belong to several groups. One is Interfaith Free Network, and I used to belong to groups that lived in Boston that worked on legislation for passing laws that improved the condition of our climate, like getting rid of gas, oil, and coal. And I would go to the legislature and lobby and advocate for that.
Have you worked with Hazon?
Yes,
No.
they're great.
Have you met my daughter? My daughter was one of their first employees, one of the first 4 people that Nigel ever hired and got off the ground with that organization.
Really?
Yeah. So did you meet the new, have you been in touch with the new leader of it? Nigel's retired away now.
No.
Okay.
I was at a climate festival all last week.
Yeah, I had this stuff too. I didn't do it this year.
And Hazo was very important.
Wonderful group. Okay, I'm done. I didn't want to stop the conversation, but I was kidding.
David, I have a question about this prayer. In the Amidah, isn't it during this prayer that on a Rosh Chodesh or Hol HaMoed, we have that insertion? And I'm just curious why the rabbis put it in this particular blessing of the Amidah, because right in the middle of it.
Yes. We do. This is the insertion called Ya'alev Yavo, because calling it Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu would just be confusing with too many other examples of the word Eloheinu. And it seems to me that because it asks God to remember the temple, I believe, and other such things, it seemed that this was the best place to put it. But I will see if I can look at the text and find a more complete answer on that, or at least a stronger answer.
So, but why does returning to Zion imply temple? Can you be in Zion without temple?
You can.
I think it's that first sentence above the Zion, restore worship to your sanctuary, right? Is that
Yes.
Your sanctuary, restore worship to, yes.
This is one of the places where liturgy has been changed by different movements. So the conservative movement has taken out the phrase V'ishe Yisrael Tfilotam, which would mean may the fires and the prayers of your people be accepted by you, lovingly accepted by you. So taking out more of the overt animal sacrifice reference here, and brought it back to restore worship. I will also go out on a limb and say that when it says restore worship to your sanctuary, I'm going to guess that this was at a time when the Jews did not, that this was written at a time when Jews did not have the freedom to just fly in, go to the Western Wall, leave a note, and like fly out. So the ability to pray in Jerusalem at all was not a given and would probably have been assumed to require the Messiah, since people did not have airplanes at the time. Yeah.
David, King David, if you will, as a child, or as we at least believe it, he wrote all those Psalms, which were essentially prayers. We even use them today. There was no sanctuary. So why must we restore worship only to a sanctuary? Philosophically, why do we have to be in a sanctuary to worship God? I mean, we all, on occasion, I presume, pray to God when we're walking along the street, if you will. But why is there this emphasis on the sanctuary being the place where one must worship?
Sure. So taking the term sanctuary to mean temple, like the temple,
Or sacred place, anyway.
yeah, it doesn't have to. So like the question reads differently depending on whether you say, why is there an emphasis on worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem versus why is there an emphasis on worship in a synagogue? I think the text, when it says restore worship to your sanctuary, if we assume sanctuary equals temple, that would mean the temple in Jerusalem, because this text was written for prayer in synagogues already.
So that would mean the 10 million Jews of the world would have to all come to Jerusalem, to the temple on the festivals.
Right.
There wouldn't be room enough.
Correct. And in Pirkei Avot, it talks about that actually, that in chapter 5, we'll, God willing, get to it someday, that that one of the miracles in the holidays was that there was always enough room in Jerusalem for everybody, which was certainly much easier 1,800 years ago. But, presumably we could make it happen again if necessary, particularly with cars and driving distance to Jerusalem being a lot easier for those who are willing to drive on the Yom Tov. Yeah, that would be a challenge. But I assume that they would say, yeah, when the Messiah comes, the Messiah will sort that one out as well as everything else.
Well, the Muslims try it today in their places of worship. They crush people.
Right. We do too, sometimes at Maron on Lag Bomer.
David, are there any interpretation, the contemporary, more contemporary interpretations that would view Zion not as Jerusalem and the temple, but more your people to the Jews of the world, and that it's a call in that interpretation to bringing all of us back to a more, to closer to a sense of what godliness is about? Or is that a totally unused, never interpreted in that way? Is Zion
Yeah.
always interpreted as Jerusalem?
So the text, so the Reform movement, when it originally started, was very big on, we are happy where we are. We don't want people thinking that we're like not completely loyal to our countries of residence. So we're taking out all reference to going back to the land of Israel. So while I don't know it to be a fact, I would strongly suspect that this paragraph was highly modified in the original Reform Siddurim of the early 1800s. I think
But Zion is always Israel, Jerusalem.
Zion is always Israel and Jerusalem, but this paragraph doesn't always have to be about Zion.
Okay.
Traditions of people.
So like, and I realized that I'd cut off a key sentence earlier. Adonai our God, embrace your people Israel and their prayer. I think if you wanted to interpret this text as being about God, like a messianic era, you would take out the word Zion, but that doesn't mean you have to take out the whole paragraph. And some different people are comfortable changing the Hebrew or reinterpreting how they think about the English while leaving the Hebrew alone.
I'd like to drill down, if I could, a little into the Techezena, the may our eyes behold, a paragraph there. I actually have, I appreciate your point about historically what it refers to. However, the previous text is all about the restoring the service. That's all very explicit. But here it says the Shekhinah, the divine presence, or however you want to understand that, is it's the blessing for returning the divine presence. So I know there's at least some theme, and I don't know historically how it's been understood, that when the temple is destroyed, or maybe when we don't deserve to have a temple, which I would say is a lot of the time, I'm a diaspora Jew anyhow, the divine presence, the Shekhinah, has left the premises and will return sometime. That's our prayer. So there is this sense of a kind of a tragic or a loss, and not merely the temple, but the divine presence. So therefore, we have to establish as best we can a connection where we happen to live, and not delude ourselves into thinking we can create it, just by a geographical move. So it's just that word Shekhinah is in there, and I've always kind of dumbly understood it to mean that. So I'd like any kind of clarification that you can give.
The question of whether the Shekhinah or your divine presence, whether that means God's presence returning to Zion versus returning to the Jewish people. Just make sure I understand what you're asking.
Well, I'm simply asking, when it says Hamachazir, in the morning blessing on arising, you say, may you return to me, using this form of that verb, my soul. Praise God, recognize that he's returned your soul. Now we're asking him to return the divine presence to Zion, and I think that means it's not it's not there in some important way.
Yes.
But I don't have I'm too ignorant of the texts to know what to do with that. But that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. It would seem that the text would, that when it says, may your eyes behold your compassionate return to Zion, we talked about how you could interpret this as you've done it, you've restored your divine presence, may we like be merit to perceive that. So you could interpret it that way, and you could also interpret it as may we live long enough to see your compassionate return to Zion and your divine presence restored to Zion. And from Zion, one way of thinking about this is that if God is in Jerusalem, then God's influence extends throughout the world, sort of like the Pope, Lahavdil. So like the Pope is in Vatican City in Rome, but the Pope's influence extends to Catholics throughout the world. So if we're asking God to return to Zion, that doesn't mean and the rest of the Jews like not in Zion can like ignore what God wants. As it says in the Torah service, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, from Zion comes forth Torah, like divine, anywhere from divine command to divine suggestion, depending on how you interpret it. So different ways of thinking about it. I'm going to go on to the next blessing because I want to make sure we have enough time for that. All righty. Don, would you read this text, please?
We thank you, for you are ever our God and the God of our ancestors. You are the bedrock of our lives, the shield that protects us in every generation. We thank you and sing your praises for our lives that are in your hands, for our souls that are under your care, for your miracles that accompany us each day, and for your wonders and your gifts that are with us each moment, evening, morning, and noon. You are the one who is good, whose mercy is never ending, the one who is compassionate, whose love is unceasing. We have always placed our hope in you. For all these blessings, may your name be praised and exalted, our sovereign, always and forever. May all that lives thank you always and faithfully praise your name forever, God of our deliverance and help. Praised are you, God, your name is goodness, and praise of you is fitting. This is the blessing of gratitude to God, O Adah. Practicing our attitude of gratitude with God strengthens our ability to express appreciation to others in our lives. When you've experienced one of the following, our lives are in your hands, our souls are under your care, your miracles accompany us each day, and your wonders and gifts are with us each moment.
Thank you.
All the time.
The most practical example I can give you is surgery. There's nothing you can do. You're there, you're under someone's hands, and they're doing whatever they need to do. And ultimately, you're grateful for whatever they did if everything went well.
Yeah.
As someone with a pregnant wife, I mean, this is like my life right now, where we're trying to do everything that we can to be safe and good, but you know, there's only so much we can do. We just have to trust that everything's going to be fine.
I'll bet the hostages that were freed in Texas over the weekend, when they pray this prayer, they have a whole new meaning because God was there and protected and made sure. So, I mean, I think you talk about personally connecting to a prayer in our liturgy. I think when you go through something like what those folks went through on Saturday, brings a whole new meaning to this liturgy.
Sometimes it takes something like that to make you realize, as I said, all the time.
We wonder about God's actions in our lives. And I just have a feeling that God guided that chair when the rabbi threw it.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it's fitting that this blessing is one of the last ones just before the peace one, before we close out the Amidah, because it's really almost the direct intervention of God in our lives. I mean, we start the Amidah with like God of history and God of nature, but by this point, I guess this is the eighth blessing on Shabbat, that there's really this personal connection now, how God is part of our lives, act proactively.
I'm uncomfortable with the example of the Texas synagogue. Frankly, you might put the question to the survivors in Pittsburgh. Not to be captious about this, but when so many were murdered because they had a synagogue that had embraced refugees, as I understand it, or at least they were on a list. And you know, to make your prayer life, if you have a kind of prayer life, depend on whether people did or didn't survive something, kind of undermines the logic of it. Everybody who wrote this knew that souls, if they were entrusted to surgeons, were not necessarily in good hands. That you hope for the best and the same otherwise.
I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, but I didn't really equate one with the other. These were, you know, this was on my mind because it happened 2 days ago, the awful tragedy in Pittsburgh.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not suggesting.
When you said you were uncomfortable,
I'm uncomfortable.
I apologize, but that was not my intention.
I'm sorry.
But it still points it out to those who care that people, what Pittsburgh, with for whatever reason, that was the determination.
I think
we say
Bill,
in
part
Russia,
of where I think there's a bit of a difference of perspective is how strictly we think there's a God entity directly intervening and leading to these outcomes, rather than, and I think that difference of interpretation probably, and you know, our own belief structures within our Judaism probably lead to different feelings. I mean, I think, Phil, probably I'm closer. I don't know your belief structure, but that I don't have a literal sense of a God deciding what happened in Texas or in Pittsburgh, but that there were elements of things within us that allowed good and bad to happen in each situation. And I think that's probably a little bit of the discomfort Phil might have been talking about. I shouldn't speak for you, Phil, but
you're doing a pretty good job. But I didn't mean to suggest to Don or to anybody that I was uncomfortable with people saying certain things. I'm uncomfortable with the logic that I hear from for example, a Lubavitcher rabbi, that we see God working in the world because of this or that excellent result in a difficult situation, when you could point to situations where people are shot dead or otherwise it would seem meaninglessly destroyed. And I just think that's part of that's part of the problem we have if we want to accept the literal or even some metaphorical account. I just think that we have to open our eyes to the whole situation. That's all. I didn't mean to dominate that conversation. Thank you.
I think there's also some way to look at this too, because I know that when we receive notices, at least from my synagogue, on somebody's death, and I don't recall the Hebrew, but it's something I believe to the effect that, you know, we trust God's judgment, even in an instance, where it's conveying bad news, whether it's a death or danger or something like that. So I guess there is something to be said for, the way God works in the world isn't always the outcome, right, that, we would expect. God is God and we're mortals. So, I mean, I think there's so many different ways to look at that the more I think about it.
I think I would agree. The sort of implications, I guess, of the problem of evil might come up to a lot of people. At least the way I understood this and the way I would just come off with it is that, especially with the prompt asking about miracles accompanying us, I think maybe a more holistic, or not holistic, but perhaps maybe a way to not necessarily get around the implication of the problem, like the problem of evil, like how it relates to bad things happening and why they happen, I think would be just the Jewish people's survival overall, I would say, is itself a miracle given the odds of the other civilizations that we've experienced, interactions with, the other things that have happened in our history. I think that our survival itself is miraculous. And I think it is a testament to God being active generally, among other things. But I suppose even that might raise some other issues if people were to look at it critically.
I'd like to make a point about, I just finished reading a book called Lightning Down. It was about a American World War II pilot who ended up with like 160 or so other American other pilots being imprisoned in Buchenwald during World War II. And his group all would have died if it weren't for a Luftwaffe officer who was a renowned German pilot, and he was able to save them by something that he said to the SS, and got them transferred to another camp. So they were all able to survive. So I think, God works in the world, but he works with us. We all have a hand in it. And it has to do with, what you do in your life, that makes a difference, no matter whether you're Jewish or not Jewish.
That was really good, Morris. It shows there are good people in the world as well as there are bad people, like the bad person who held hostages. And then here's somebody who you would never think would do that, but is just a good person. He was definitely serving God.
Let's go on to our next blessing so we can try to get close to finishing before we run out of time. Norma, would you read this text and then the next text, please?
Grant abundant and lasting peace to your people Israel and all who dwell on earth, for you are the sovereign master of all the ways of peace. May it please you to bless your people Israel at all times with your gift of peace. Praised are you, God, who blesses your people Israel with peace.
Okay, that's our evening version of Shalom Rav, and here's the morning one of Sim Shalom.
Grant peace to the world, goodness and blessing, grace, love, and compassion for us and for all the people Israel. Bless us, our Creator, united as one with the light of your presence. By that light, Adonai, our God, you have given us a guide to life. the love of kindness, righteousness, blessing, compassion, love, and peace. May it please you to bless your people Israel at every season and at all times with your gift of peace. Praised are you, God, who blesses your people Israel with peace. This is the last blessing of the Amidah, and it focuses on peace, Birkat Shalom. There are two versions, Sim Shalom, which is used in the morning, plus fast day afternoons, and Shalom Rav, which is used in the afternoon and evening. The Sephardic tradition is to use Sim Shalom all the time, and the tradition in Avignon, France, is to use Shalom Rav all the time. Evidence for the different usages of these prayers date back to the 1100s. The reason for these two prayers for peace may be that one was written in the land of Israel, Sim Shalom, was written in Babylonia. Later on in Europe, as members of these two communities mingled, they assigned the two versions to different services in order to respect each community's customs, fitting for a prayer about peace. Sim Shalom was assigned to services when the priestly blessing, Birkat Kohanim, was said. What's an aspect of your personal, local, national, or global world that could use peace? That's a big question.
Wow.
Question should be more, when you can't use peace, because it's like we could use it for every occasion.
Yeah.
So what happens to the idea of judgment from God? Is that opposite to peace, or can you have judgment within peace?
Depending on the situation, sometimes you need judgment to bring about peace.
Well, I mean, just an aspect of personal peace right now that could use peace would be the situation that's going on with COVID.
I think there's a theme throughout our liturgy that peace is often kind of perceived as the reward for living well and being ethical and obeying God's commandments and performing mitzvot. It seems like peace is the end result, although you could look at the other way and say, you know, if you bring peace into the world, these other things will happen. So I'm just curious kind of what you folks see as the flow here. If peace is the end result or if peace is the cause.
What's the difference?
I think what Don is asking is, does living a good life lead to personal peace, or does personal peace lead to living a good life?
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Right now, we're really not at peace in any of these, locally, nationally, global, personal, anywhere. We could all use some peace.
I think things are always chaotic, and for me, it's the peace. For me, is the respite between the chaos that we encounter in life. And you're striving for that. And how do you find peace in all of this, mentally, or shall we say, just the being? And what do you consider peace? Everybody's going to be. There's always something going on somewhere.
You know, I always thought about peace as the absence of war. And right now in this country, at this moment, although I haven't watched the news the last 45 minutes, things could change. But in this country right now, we're technically at peace. I mean, we don't have a declared war, you know, against any other countries right now. But I personally don't feel at peace because there's so many threats and things like that. So, I mean, I guess the point is peace can be so relative. You know what I mean? It's like a relative feeling, I think.
And back to the earlier comment is, you know, is through peace that you get to an end state of, you know, of sanctity, or is it through being, use the word sang? defied, but whatever, but by leading a life that's a good life, do we get to peace? I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg question, that it's cyclical. And I think it goes back to the earlier one of practicing gratitude to God, where try to practice, and peace isn't to me just between countries, war versus peace, but it's internal, it's all these, has the personal, local, community-based, meaning local, not, Chicago versus St. Louis in the World Series, but, more community-based to a more global concept of just how do we get to a peaceful, a healed world.
Peace for me is an internal sense of well-being. It has to be in my heart, in my mind, in the way I move, in the way I interact. And that helps me deal with the national, local, and global that's falling apart. If I don't have that peace inside myself, comfort inside myself, feeling comfortable in my own skin, how on earth can I deal with other pieces of the world that are falling apart if I'm falling apart?
I see that you,
Go ahead.
oh, thank you. I see, David, you use the version, I'm glad you did actually, of Sim Shalom. I think it's in the current conservative Siddur, the one used now, Lev Shalom, and it's also in the previous one. That is, it says peace, Sim Shalom Ba'olam, Ba'olam, right, in the world. But the old traditional Ashkenazic book didn't have that. And there's a note in the conservative Siddur, at least there used to be, that's pointed out that Saja Gaon, so we're going back 1,000 years, had that in his prayer book. And I like that version. And it does enlarge it to the world, or by saying peace in the world, rather than just in our tribe or whatever. But I think I just wanted to point that out. If you go into an Orthodox shul, I don't think you'll see that Ba'olam, even though nobody argues that Saja Gaon was not a big deal.
Right, and many of the tunes for Sim Shalom don't fit with the word Ba'olam because they were written for that text.
But he could squeeze them in. I know Cantor doesn't do that,
but it doesn't. It's clearly not meant for it. All right, so recognizing that it's about the end of the hour, I'm going to quickly show you what else is in the source sheet for you to peruse on your own. We have the last paragraph. This is for personal prayer. And we have here an example of personal prayer from one of the rabbis of the Talmud. But this is where you get to say what you want to say to God. Help me with this. Thank you for that. Whatever's on your heart. Have here a little bit about how we say it, that Rabbi Akiva was so into his studies or into his prayer that he would bow and move about so much that he'd start in one corner, end up in another corner. And today we stand like the angels with our legs together for the Amidah based off of a vision of Ezekiel. But people still like chuckle and sway from side to side and get into the text. We have here a Bim Bum video overviewing the Amidah again, written by Rabbi David Wolkenfeld, who was one of the people that organized the Chicagoland text like Psalms, and also somebody that I worked with previously. And then we've got some musical versions of Shalom Rav, Sim Shalom, and Oseh Shalom, all of which are texts that pray for peace. So we have probably, if you know any tune for Shalom Rav, you probably know the one by Kol Beseder, Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, that one. So we have them singing it. We have a new version of Sim Shalom put out by 613. I hadn't seen it before, but I was excited to bring it to you guys. And then we have 5 different versions of Oseh Shalom. This is the New Reed Hirsch one. Osa Shalom Bimrama, probably the one that people are most familiar with. We have a newish one by Navatihua. Osa Shalom Bimrama. We have one from Debbie Friedman. Osa Shalom Bimrama. We have one from Karl Bach. Osa Shalom Shalom Bimrama. And then we have again from Kol Beseder. Osa Shalom Shalom Bimrama. So 5 different versions with recordings of the original artists. This one has a conversation with them as well, whenever possible. So lots for you guys to look at and think about how it relates to your, how it changes your views of it.
David?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to mention, what about the Sim Shalom done by Cantor Ozzy Schwartz in New York?
I don't know if I know it. I know there are many, many, many tunes for Sim Shalom, but I will see if I can find that one and share it with the group.